In the distance, louder than the thunder, the sound of the 6-pound artillery guns in the tank, firing point blank, echoed up the canal to them. Wolfgang redoubled his efforts, leaning forward, putting all his weight into driving the blade of the bayonet through the rope that had them trapped on the dock. Lightning flashed, and he saw Renoir explode up out of the water, heaving in air. He wiped the water out of his eyes and looked back to Wolfgang. "Have the rope," Renoir yelled. "But she is seized to the cleat. We'll have to cut it." "I know!" Wolfgang shouted over the downpour and the guns. "If we need to cut the bow line first, then I'll bring you the bayonet." Renoir nodded. Lightning struck. Wolfgang and Renoir saw Bathsheba coming down the path toward them, stepping high through the flood. They saw the whites of the horse's eyes rolling in terror as she moved past them, riderless. Renoir shook his head. "Our cavalryman. We cannot wait for him." Wolfgang nodded. He followed the horse the length of the boat to Durant, rushing through the water with the bayonet. Jonah and Adolf were halfway to Donny at the rear machine gun when Bathsheba and Wolfgang splashed past on the mule path. James Cox watched in horror as the shell-shocked horse cantered past Durant. When Bathsheba reached the avenue that ran to the canal, she turned into it. With a powerful burst, she leapt from the flooded mule path and disappeared into San Quentin's blackened streets. "Here!" Wolfgang yelled as he handed Durant the bayonet. "Hurry!" Durant grabbed the blade and cut into the rope, sawing desperately. "We should not wait to cut the rear line," Wolfgang said. Durant nodded. "If the rider's not here before we cut the stern warp, he's not coming." On the V-109 deck, Rupert came up from below decks and stumbled to the bow, hollering down to Wolfgang. "The boiler is lit, but we won't have power for some time." "We'll ride the current until we do," Wolfgang replied. "Get to the wheel. Be ready to steer us." Rupert nodded and headed for the calm. Durant was halfway through the bow line when they heard yelling from the rear of the boat. Then the machine gun erupted in a roar of fire. Rupert reached the steps that led to the wheelhouse and yelled to Jonah, who was kneeling at the rear machine gun beside Donny and Adolf. "Make ready! As soon as the stern line is cut, we are going." "Yes, Sergeant," Jonah replied. Rupert climbed the stairs and took the wheel. Adolf stood behind Donny, both men hovering over Jonah Unger as he inspected the rear MG. Jonah opened the MG-08 receiver and pointed toward the ammunition box. "Give me the Munitionsgürtel." Donny heard the stream of German and remarkably understood precisely what the Jewish fellow was asking for. He opened the ammo can and felt for the end of the cloth belt filled with brass, lead, and white powder. He passed the belt to Jonah, who dropped it into the teeth of the MG and snapped the receiver closed. He moved the well-oiled gun back and forth on its tripod, testing the sweep. He was pleased to see it had been well maintained. Lightning flashed. Jonah Unger looked up. He saw the beasts splashing down the mule path toward Renoir. He cried out to the Belgian, "Hund! Hund!" Renoir looked back. 3 massive German shepherds, pushed by the current, surged through the water, up to their necks, raging toward the Belgian. Renoir stepped backward. His foot caught on the cleat, and before the first dog leapt, he was already falling, tripping backward over the rope. It saved his life. The foremost German shepherd's teeth snapped air where Renoir's face had been a millisecond before. Renoir felt the dog coming down with him, and he shoved into its soft belly, throwing it past him down the mule path, driven by its own momentum. Renoir's back hit the water, and he disappeared into it. He heard the water-dampened roar of Jonah triggering the machine gun. Wolfgang saw Renoir disappear underwater. The German shepherd splashed down. When it came up, it was ploughing toward Wolfgang and Durant, teeth flashing. Wolfgang set his feet as the dog tore through the water. It leapt and struck. Wolfgang grabbed for its hackles and felt sharp canines ripping into his forearms, stabbing with its muzzle, trying to find purchase on arteries or anywhere that delicate organ meats sat waiting. Wolfgang fell back, fighting desperately to keep the beast from getting past his arms to his head and neck. Then Durant was there, and Wolfgang heard the dog yelp as the bayonet stabbed into it again and again. It tried to turn its teeth on Durant, but the blade came up under its chin, and Durant shoved and twisted the dog away, then drove all his weight down, pressing the steel point through the base of the skull up into the dog's brains. The shepherd went limp, and Durant released. He twisted and pulled, yanking the bayonet out. The MG kept chattering at the rear of the barge. Durant grabbed Wolfgang by the shoulder. "You all right?" "Yeah, cut the line." Durant found the bow rope, felt for the notch he had already sawed halfway through. He slid the bayonet into it and ran its bloody teeth back and forth furiously. The rope split in two and went slack. The rushing canal caught the head of the boat and slammed the nose of the V-109 into the canal pilings. The steel deck rail bobbed up and caught Durant in the hip, knocking him to his knees on the streaming mule path. The current grabbed him and tried to pull him away, but Durant found purchase and stumbled to his feet. He fought past Wolfgang as the water surged, struggling toward Renoir and the last rope at the stern. "Get on board! I'll cut the rear warp line!" Durant yelled. Wolfgang nodded and tried to stand, but he had to stop halfway, catching his breath. His left arm was bleeding badly and throbbing. He flexed his forearm and found that the muscles would all contract. The attack had not rent tendons or muscle. He hoped the dog's teeth had not severed a vein. As Renoir sat up and sucked in air, the MG's sound vibrated through him. The stutter of muzzle flash lit the canal, along with staccato lightning from the sky. A bracing roll of thunder drowned the MG's bark. The two German shepherds caught in Jonah's field of fire danced and yelped as bullets tore through them. Donnie guided the cloth belt smoothly out of the feed tray up to Jonah's waiting MG. Jonah released the trigger. When lightning flashed again, it showed the current catching the dead dogs and pulling them out into the canal, past the boat and into the night. Durant reached Renoir and helped him up. "Give me the bayonet. I'll cut the line," Renoir hollered. Durant nodded. He handed the bayonet and stumbled to the edge of the boat, reaching for the railing. Renoir grabbed the final rope and sliced into it. While Jonah's bullets ripped through the thick fur and skin of the dogs, on the far side of the boat, little boy Halstead pulled his blackened body out of the canal and onto the vessel's deck. Harlan, Daddy Cox, Sheriff Coombs, and Big Don McMaster came after him. The five of them had slipped into the canal and let the fast-moving flow take them underwater to the boat. They latched on and eased their way to midships on the canal side, waiting patiently for the German shepherds to draw the attention of the men on deck. When the MG lit into the dogs, they followed Halstead silently up onto the barge. Adolf was backing away from the roaring machine gun. He glanced to where Rupert was making ready in the wheelhouse. He looked at the stairs that led to the safety of the hold below. But before he could escape down them, little boy Halstead grabbed him and dragged him back behind the cover of the wheelhouse, pulling him close. Adolf felt cold spittle hitting his face with the rain as little boy Halstead spoke. "Your debt is not paid, boy. You owe the fat man." Little boy Halstead pointed toward Jonah Unger. "Start with the boy who's killing my dogs." "No, I have no weapons," Adolf stammered. "With your hands, then. We are done with your excuses." Adolf swallowed hard. Ja, Evian." Little boy Halstead released him. Adolf stood. He took a halting breath, and then, before fear could stop him, he started across the deck to where Jonah and Donnie were firing at the German shepherds. The machine gun quit. There was a second of breathless silence. Jonah searched the rain for more targets. Adolf reached out for Jonah, hands shaking. He lunged, wrapped his arm around the young man's neck, and yanked him backward, choking him. They hit the deck, flailing. Donnie cried out in surprise as Adolf seized Jonah. Then Big Don had his son, squeezing his neck, vice-like, smothering his mouth with his hand, stifling his cry of alarm. Big Don whispered harshly as he dragged his son away from Adolf's attempted murder. "Shh! Shut your mouth, boy. Shut your goddamn trap. Papa's here now." Donnie knew his father's voice when he heard it. He shook with terror. He took heed. Donnie saw a tick of movement. Then little boy Halstead ran past him, spear in hand. Just as Durant pulled himself on deck, little boy Halstead struck, smashing into him, tackling him backward off the boat. "Follow my lead, sonny," said Big Don. "Yes, sir, Papa. Yes, sir," Donnie squealed. Big Don released Donnie. His son watched the big German body his papa was in run across the deck of the boat, striding past Adolf and Jonah Unger. Then Big Don leapt. He seemed to hang in the air. Then his body slammed down onto Renoir, who was bent at the waist, furiously sawing through the last line linking them to the dock. They disappeared into the black water. Donnie stumbled across the deck, climbed over the rail, and followed his father. Renoir never sensed them coming. The rope was nearly cut through when he was blindsided. He dropped the bayonet as he pushed himself back up, but then punches were raining down on him. He felt a brutal strike to his skull behind his right ear. Then they were savaging him with their fists, snapping at him with their teeth, shoving him underwater and holding him there, sending punches down into the blackness aimed at his kidneys, forcing him to suck canal water down into his lungs. They held Renoir there until he gave up, ceasing all struggle, folding into the tender mercy of deep, dark oblivion. In the wheelhouse, Rupert had been making the boat ready when it began. All that remained was to cast off. In the light of his sapper flashlight, he saw the pressure gauge needle starting to climb as the coal burning in the boiler room began to build steam. He turned the wheel and felt the rudder move smoothly in response. When he heard Jonah Unger yelling, "Hund! Hund!" he turned and saw the machine gun erupt, lighting into the German shepherds. Scheiße! He looked at the bow, where James Cox was watching Wolfgang and Durant fight the first hound. Lightning ripped the sky, and Rupert saw Durant savage the thing with the bayonet. Durant stood and stumbled backward, then grabbed Wolfgang and pulled him up. Rupert could not tell how badly Wolfgang had been hurt, but it seemed like they had the moment of breath they needed to cut free of the dock and get underway. He saw Durant slice the bow line and get knocked sideways. Then he was helping Wolfgang along. The machine gun went silent. While Wolfgang struggled toward the side of the boat, Durant splashed along to Renoir at the stern line and passed him the bayonet. Rupert looked back toward the stern MG. Lightning struck. He saw Adolf choking the life out of Jonah Unger. He saw dark forms running across the deck toward Durant and Renoir. Rupert raced down the steps, yelling at the top of his lungs. James Cox watched in horror, helpless, as Durant and Wolfgang fought the German Shepherd. He forced himself toward the railing and saw Durant shoving the blade home and finishing the dog. Gunfire roared from the stern. He saw Durant cut the line and run through the water toward the stern as the machine gun silenced. Wolfgang was bleeding badly from the dog bites. James stretched out his hand to help him board. "Come on, Mr. Strathman, I got you." Wolfgang reached out for him. James saw Wolfgang's eyes go wide. Then movement flashed past James, and Wolfgang disappeared under a pair of punching, kicking, raging dead men. "No!" James yelled. He started forward, ready to leap to Wolfgang's aid, but strong hands grabbed the nape of his shirt and shoulder. He spun backwards, felt his legs catch on his attacker's hip. Then he was falling, hitting the deck, head hammering down and bouncing off it. He blacked out for a millisecond, then came to. He rolled onto his side, trying to stand, but his legs would not listen. Then something grabbed him by the collar and smashed him down onto his back, straddling him, trapping his arms by his sides. He tried to yell out, but his voice box was not reconnected to his brain's impulses. Then the thing was ripping open James's coat and pulling his pocket watch out. He smelled rank, dead breath as the thing on top of him leaned in. "Hey there, baby brother. Had to go and filch my watch, didn't you?" Harlan Cox asked. James Cox flinched at the sound of his brother's voice. "Don't you remember Mama always saying, it's what you do when no one's a-watching that reveals your character? You remember that?" James did. But now Harlan had his trachea in his hand and was squeezing the cartilage. Even if he had a reasonable reply, he could not have offered it. "You know what the good book says for thieves, baby brother? It says we cut off your hands. So I suppose that's where your punishment ought to begin. Let's kick off there and see what comes next." Harlan's father and Sheriff Coombs were disappearing with Wolfgang Strothman in tow, pulling his limp body up the path, ready for the hangman. But Harlan was utterly serious about a different path for his brother. Slow, steady, cruel, meticulously violent, then buried alive. The exact same style of death that had taken Harlan's life. Harlan Cox was ready to bathe in his brother's blood. Harlan stood and hauled James to his feet. He dragged him across the deck and threw his sibling overboard, splashing onto the mule path. Adolf had Jonah Unger's neck cinched tight. He was squeezing with all of his might. Jonah felt the throb of his own pulse in his neck dwindling, even as his heart tried to pump blood faster and faster. He sucked in a breath of air, reached out, then jammed his sharp elbow back into Adolf's testicles. Adolf screamed in pain, and his grip loosened. Jonah shot the elbow again. Then Adolf was pushing him away, trying to save himself from another strike. Jonah fought to catch his breath and stand, but he could not make it past his knees. He looked up and saw the little sapper, Rupert Fuchs, leaping down the wheelhouse steps. Then he was standing between them, the little round flashlight around his neck lighting up Adolf's anguished face. Rupert held a short ratchet blade in his hands. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Jonah heard Rupert yell at Adolf. Adolf charged. The little sapper did not flinch. He met the attack and stabbed upward into Adolf's belly. Corporal Hitler shrieked. Rupert pulled the knife out and slashed at him. Adolf stumbled backward, hands trying to ward off the attack, naked palms taking a raking cut that splayed them open, scattering blood into the rain. Adolf's calves hit the deck rail, and he tripped backward out of the boat. Rupert watched Adolf disappear. Beyond him, lit by his dying flashlight, he saw the horribly blackened flesh of Halstead's naked back rise out of the flooded path. The spear in Halstead's hand cocked back to strike the man below him. Rupert Fuchs did not hesitate. He dropped his knife and jumped, reaching for the spear shaft, strong hands closing round it as his body crashed into Halstead's corpse. The spear ripped free from Halstead's grasp. Little boy Halstead roared. He had been one thrust from the joy of ending Durant and spoiling the entire game. He turned to destroy whoever had done it. His own spear shot straight up through his open, screaming mouth. The leaf of the steel blade went through his soft palate. Rupert's legs drove him up, sending the blade shearing through Halstead's brainstem and vertebrae. Halstead's corpse went limp. The dead weight nearly yanked the spear out of Rupert's hands, but Rupert tore it free. The corpse dropped into the water. It bobbed up, then floated away down the rushing mule path. Rupert yanked the chain on his flashlight. He reached down into the water and found Durant. He pulled him to his feet and dragged him, coughing and spitting, to the side of the boat. He helped Durant get his hands wrapped around the wet steel of the deck railing. Then Rupert turned to where Renoir had been assaulted by Big Don and his boy, Donnie Jr. They were gone. Rupert pulled the chain again and looked to the front of the craft. Another burst of lightning seared the night, and he saw James Cox being hefted off the boat onto the mule path. The man who had thrown him stood on the bow, triumphant. He glared back toward Rupert's dull yellow flashlight. Of Wolfgang, Daddy Cox, and Sheriff Coombs, there was no sign. Suddenly, the rear rope Renoir had savaged to threads split in two. The stern of the boat caught the current's energy, and it tore away from the dock, dragging Durant out into the flow, hanging by his fingers from the railing. The front of the boat slammed into the pilings and stuck, while the ass end careened out into the ever-widening canal. Rupert considered an impossible leap, but knew his legs would fail him. He saw the bow held up on the pilings. He ran toward it, spear raised. As James Cox surfaced and stood, in the flare of lightning, he watched Halstead's limp corpse float past. He looked up at Harlan and began backing away on shaking legs. He saw Harlan glance up the canal toward the little sapper's beam of light. Then the boat was yanked into the current as the rope fibers gave. When the bow hit the pilings and caught, Harlan's boots slipped on the deck and he stumbled overboard. James dodged back as the boat thrust toward him. He felt his brother's hand brush his chest as he hit the water beside him. Adrenaline saved James. It sent a pulse through his legs and he flew, knees high, legs striding through the water. He scrambled out of its flow into the mouth of the avenue Darren Tremaine's horse had escaped up. He surged out of the canal water and ran after Bathsheba, faster than he could ever have imagined possible, desperation spurring every step, every burning breath, every impossibly fast contraction of his little heart as he vanished into the streets of San Quentin.